You think that message would be effectively addressed to the situation in Ukraine? Do you think that message would be heard in Gaza or Israel? Do you think that message would be heard in Central and South America, where the cartels run the governments? Do you think that message would be heard with the right wing of American politics or in the halls of our own United States Congress? Is that a message that they would listen to and say, oh, I forgot that, yeah. Let's start doing that. If Jesus came to them and said, you've heard it said that you should love your neighbor as yourself, but I say unto you, love your neighbor as well, love your enemy as well. Do you think they would listen? Well, I, for one, doubt that they would. So maybe Paul is right. The first thing we have to do is take a look in the mirror and say, have I conformed to this age? Has this just become such a part of my life that now what's going on in the world is something I just hear on the news and then go ahead and drink my coffee and do whatever I was going to do today? Or do we have to be transformed by the renewing of our minds so that we, like the Romans, may discern what is the will of God? It's tough. But did you pay attention to the opening hymn? I know, you sounded great singing. Did you pay attention to the words? Listen to the words now. You can read them all. It's 724. O God of earth and altar, bow down and hear our cry. Our earthly leaders falter. Our people drift and die. The walls of gold entomb us. The swords of scorn divide. Take not your thunder from us, but take away our pride. From all that terror teaches, from lies of pen and tongue, from all the easy speeches that soothe us in our wrong, from sale and profanation, of honor and the sword, from sleep and from damnation, deliver us, O Lord. Awaken us to action and forge us into one, defying sect and faction. O God, your will be done. Oppressive systems snare us, our apathies increase. Great God, in mercy spare us, for justice and for peace. Now, that's what you just sang. You have to ask yourself, well, did I sing that with integrity? Did I even pay attention to what I was saying? Because in the context of worship, it's not just what's said here at this lectern, but we say to each other the pledges we made to Peyton, the pledges her parents and godparents made to her, the statements we make in our singing when we become community in song. From time to time, I read our congregation's mission statement. Do you remember what it is? What we say in that mission statement is our commitment to, number one, affirming the presence of God in all persons. Two, supporting all people in their search for truth and meaning. Three, encouraging spiritual practices that lead to wholeness. And four, building a caring community that pursues peace through justice. Finally, being good stewards of God's creation. Now, that's what we as United Christian Church say we're all about. That's what we as United Christian Church say we are called to be. Have we said enough to affirm the presence of God in all persons when we see the wars that are going on? The prejudices that prevail in our culture? The demeaning of people that takes place often before our very eyes? Have we done enough to support all people in their search for truth and meaning, or are we still trapped in the idea that we've got the answer? If you're not Christian, or if you're not Jewish, or if you're not Islam, then you're wrong? Or do we celebrate the discovery of meaning and fulfillment, of purpose and loving relatedness wherever it is found? Have we done enough to encourage spiritual practices that lead to wholeness? Or has our apathy allowed us to stand aside while brokenness and alienation and separation and hostility invade all that is around us? And have we done enough in building a caring community that pursues peace through justice? Or have we drifted more and more, ever so slightly, into silence, into apathy, into the reasons we give ourselves? I'm too tired. I've done enough. I'm too old. There's nothing I can do to make a difference. And are we being good stewards of God's creation? And I always think of that in terms of nature. Of course, that's what it primarily means. But it's easy to forget that if we're good stewards of God's creations, we're good stewards of one another's lives. Because we are God's creation. Precious persons are God's creation. It's pretty extensive what we said we're all about. I mean, it gets right down to it. And while we're doing all this visioning at the church, maybe we ought to revisit that statement and say, well, how are we doing with that? How are we doing with what we've already said? But one thing is clear. That references to love of self and neighbor, even love of the enemy, love of creation, and love of God flow through the scriptures to the point that it becomes impossible to think of anything as being more foundational to Christian faith than living a life of love. God is love. Those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them, the scriptures tell us. So in my view of it, the scriptures and the very essence of our Christian faith call us to live life loving as deeply as we can, in as many ways as we can, indeed, is a call to us to make loving our very way of being. Now, all of this is easier said than done. The journey toward a wholeness and loving life is arduous and often frightening. In order to love ourselves and to love others and to love God, in order to live in love and to make loving one's way of being, our journey toward that will cause us to travel through and explore the sometimes painful and sometimes wonderful terrains of our inner selves. The poet Roshani Ray speaks of this in her poem, The Unbroken, when she writes, "There is a brokenness out of which comes the unbroken, a shatteredness out of which bloomed the unshatterable. There is a sorrow beyond all grief that leads to joy, and a fragility out of whose depths emerges strength. There is a hollow space too vast for words, through which we pass with each loss, out of whose darkness we are sanctioned into being. There is a cry deeper than all sound, whose serrated edges cut the heart as we break open to the place inside which is unbreakable and whole, while learning to sing." At essence, the Christian faith affirms that when we move from separateness, brokenness, or fragmentation in our thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and actions to wholeness, to love, we will begin to understand that we are all created in the reality of infinite love. The love that has brought all that is into being, the love that binds each one of us to everything that is in and at one-ment, which is the meaning of atonement, that can only be sensed but can never be fully comprehended. A sensed awareness of the infinite in all that seems finite, a sensed awareness of the sacred in all that seems profane, a sensed awareness of the divinity that resides in our own humanity. This greater experience leaves us sometimes fearing and yet very much wanting to grasp and express what waits within us, that which has not yet been known or spoken, that which has not yet been made through the word within ourselves. This great experience leaves one with the feeling that whether love comes from heaven or earth, love is always divine. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And in this sense, wholeness gives rise to holiness. So what do we have to say to a world at war? What do we have to say to a time of fragmentation and prejudice, where hate, not love, where fear, not faith, seems to have such sway? Well, stated simply, I would say that what the church has to say is that we affirm a new dimension of morality, a morality that sets aside a morality of limitations, constraints, and prohibitions, and offers instead a morality that is grounded in the very depths of human nature at its best, a morality of possibility, aspiration, and spiritual experience. What the church has to proclaim is a proclamation that calls for a new way of being, a way of being that sets aside the quest for power, domination, and imagined superiority, and offers instead a way of being that is grounded in the inherent human capacity for service, justice, and compassion. The church's proclamation, when the church is true to that proclamation, is one that calls for a new way of seeing, a way of seeing that goes beyond looking with physical eyes, empirical observation, and objectified reality, and offers instead a way of seeing that moves beyond sight to insight, in a way that imbues our mind's eye, transforming our minds, with a new capacity for seeing what our physical eyes cannot, the sacred, the transcendent, and the essence of how life is meant to be experienced. What the church has to say when the church is true to its own proclamation is something that calls for a new way of understanding our own lives as human beings, a way of understanding ourselves that transcends the descriptions of unworthiness, sinfulness, and inadequacy, and offers instead a way of understanding ourselves in terms of our preciousness, our creative possibilities, and our worthiness for being loved. The church's proclamation is one that calls for a new way of pursuing interpersonal relationships, a way of pursuing relationships that challenges the phobias, the prejudices, and the stereotypes that occasion fear, abuse, and rejection, and offers instead a view of interpersonal relationships that affirms the life-enhancing meaningfulness of celebrating diversity, offering unconditional acceptance, and living life with a loving attitude to any persons whom we might encounter. What is more, the church's proclamation is one that calls us to a new way of understanding the reality of God, a new way of understanding the reality of God that frees us from the concept of God that is created in our own human image, often in the form of projections of our own best traits and worst inclinations, acceptance and rejection, forgiveness and punishment, creativity and destructiveness, freedom and control, and offers instead a concept of God that is occasioned by what we ourselves experience in a variety of ways as the sacred in life and life in the sacred, an experience that more often than not is grounded in moments in which we have loved and felt loved, or have felt an at one-ment with nature, or have held in our arms a just-born new life that is our own creation, or have experienced a sense of awe in realizing that the finite reality of our individual lives are lived in the eternal reality of infinite being. All of this and more is found in the church's biblical witness, in the church's historic commitment to social justice, and the church's most fundamental affirmation of the life of Jesus as being paradigmatic for how life could and should be lived. Is that not what we have done today with the baptism? Is that not the message we need to proclaim openly, uninhibitedly, to a world that needs to hear? Is that not the attitude that must be addressed even if it's ridiculed? To the wars, the rumors of wars, the hostilities, the brokenness, and the hatred of our time. This is our message. This is the good news, if we can imagine what could be. May it be so.